Hi, fourth grade reading. Welcome back to our study of poetry. Let's go ahead and review what we learned last week with our two famous poets. We learned about Edgar Allan Poe, and we read a poem from him called Annabel Lee. And we also read a short poem by Shel Silverstein. With these two poems, we focused on learning about the tone. Remember the tone? It's the feeling, the mood, the speaker's attitude towards the poem. Today, we'll be focusing on two format poetic terms, and we're studying a new poet and a new poem today. Okay? So our objective is I can analyze a poem. We know what analyze means. It means to dig deeper, to find more meaning in a poem, to not accept words and stanzas just as they come, surface level, but to figure out what's the metaphorical meaning to the poem or the symbolism to the poem. We're also going to define stanza and refrain. Now, with tone, that's something that we can use context clues to figure out, but stanza and refrain might be easier for you to point out because these are a part of the format of poems. Okay? Let me tell you what the materials you will need today. You will need a pen or a pencil. You will need 2 note cards to define stanza and refrain. You will need the poem that we're going to study that I sent to your parents called The Road Not Taken. Alongside this poem, you will also need the comprehension questions. And we will review 1, 4, and 7 together, and you will answer the rest by yourself. For our Zoom meetings, we're going to go over those answers. Okay? Let me reveal to you our famous poet today. Here he is as a younger gentleman, born around 1864, which is the Civil War era time period. You can tell because this photo is black and white. And here he is as an older man. His name is Robert Frost, and I think this picture does a little bit better job of having you remember his name because he has frosty white hair. So Robert Frost, he is an American poet, and his poems became super popular in the early 1900s. Okay? All right. The most famous poem, arguably, by Robert Frost is The Road Not Taken. And he actually mentions a wood, or 2 roads, in a wood that split. And he has a choice to make. So, if you were walking in a forest or a wood during the fall time, and you notice that all of a sudden one path turns into 2 paths, which path would you take? Would you take A or would you take B? Look closely. Make your decision. If you had a difficult time choosing which path to take, A because they're similar and B because you're uncertain where both of them might lead, you might be feeling how the speaker was feeling in A Road Not Taken. Now, the funny thing about this poem is that many students, they misunderstand the theme of this poem. After reading it, most people go, oh, this poem's theme is all about individualism and going to the beat of your own drum in life, following your own dreams even though they're not as popular as others, not following the crowd, doing your own thing, pretty much. But really, that's not what this poem is really about. And so many people misunderstand the theme, and we will analyze each stanza and analyze what the poem really means, because it's not about individualism and following your own path and dreams, although that sounds like a inspirational theme, but that's not really what it is about. Okay, but first, let's go ahead and learn our poetic terms before we analyze the poem by Robert Frost. Okay. Remember, we're defining stanza and refrain, so get your note cards ready. poetry, we have stanzas. A stanza is a group of lines in a poem grouped by meter and rhythmical pattern. Similar to paragraphs in prose, but here are the differences. You do not have to use proper punctuation or capitalization. So you can see the example here. These 3 lines make up a stanza. Notice that some of them do not have punctuation at the ends of the lines because it's a continuation of a sentence on the next line. What you will do is you will pause my screen, you will take your note card, write stanza on the front, pause, and then write the definition on the back, and you can pause. Moving on, our next word was refrain. Refrain. You might have heard this in music class or at church. The priest might say, "Let's practice the refrain again." Well, a refrain is a phrase, line, or group of lines repeated within a poem, often at the end of a stanza. Now, we will find that our poem, The Road Not Taken, does not have a refrain, but guess which poem does? Our poem from Poe, Annabel Lee. That line, "In this kingdom by the sea, in this kingdom by the sea," is repeated all throughout the poem. So that's called a refrain. Pause and make your note card. So far, we have learned tone, stanza, refrain. And next week we'll add on to our vocabulary bucket. Okay, very good. Now we're going to read the poem. We will count how many stanzas it has. Again, I already told you it does not have a refrain. And then we're going to analyze the poem to figure out what the theme is, if there's any symbolism. Is it a metaphor? Are there similes? We're going to pull out that figurative language. Okay, so take your poem and your pen or pencil. Get ready to annotate because when we read, good readers take notes. Stanza 1 is 5 lines. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Pause. Let's analyze this stanza. We have 2 roads that diverge in a yellow wood. What do you think diverge means? It means split. So go ahead and write that up on top of diverged. Now, it's important that he says yellow wood because he's giving us the setting. He's telling us that this is in the fall time because trees are only yellow in fall. So go ahead and write fall time above yellow wood. Or you can write fall season if you wish. Now he says he's sorry he couldn't travel both, so we're feeling maybe a sense of regret that he wants to take both, but he cannot, right? He can't be in 2 places at once. So let's go ahead and write that word regret. And be one traveler long I stood, so he's alone. He says one traveler, write alone. He looked down one as far as he could to where it bent in the undergrowth. So he's trying to figure out which one to take, standing there, seeing how far he can see. All right. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. So in this stanza, he does choose a path. He says it perhaps has a better claim. It looks a little nicer. It was grassier. But really, at the end of the day, he says the paths look about the same. So again, he's faced with difficulty. So go ahead and write the paths are very similar. Now, by this time, you should be asking yourself, is this poem really about paths in a forest? That's kind of boring. Why would he just write about a forest? So maybe you're thinking that path may be a metaphor for something else, right? It's not a literal path, it's something deeper. Let's go to the next stanza, starting at line 11. And both that morning equally lay, and leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. Okay. Here it says he's going to keep the first for another day. That means that he wants to come back, but he's saying at the end, I doubt if I will come back, right? So he's kind of saying, once you're on one path, you tend to follow it all the way through. So let's go ahead and write. The speaker wants to take the other path at another time, but he doubts he will. The speaker wants to take the other path at another time, but he doubts he will. Last stanza. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. This is why this poem is so very popular. This part right here, I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. It is probably one of the most quoted poets at any graduation ever. Okay? So let's go ahead and start back. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Well, when do you sigh? You sigh when you're upset or when you have regret or you're disappointed. So we feel a sense of disappointment or regret, possibly. Let's go ahead, maybe disappointment. Disappointment there. And he's looking back at this time, which means, it's been a long time since he's made this decision of taking one path over the other. Now, you see this hyphen right here? In poetry, we call that a caesura, which means there's a dramatic pause, right? We're supposed to pause in I took the one less traveled by. Like when we have a comma, we pause. So this part right here, and that has made all the difference. We really don't know if it's a difference for the good or a difference for the bad. We don't know whether it's a positive difference or a negative difference. All we know is that it has made some type of significant difference. But this is where people say, oh, the road less traveled by, that must mean kind of a metaphor for making a choice that's not the most popular choice amongst your peers or your colleagues. And choosing the path that you think is best for you, doing something different, doing something that you know is right for you, and following that dream, right? So people think that this last couplet, right, has all to do with following your own path in life. For example, maybe all of your friends a few years from now are going to go to Clemson. And that's the popular choice. And you have these two choices, Clemson and USC, and both paths look pretty similar. They're both big schools. They're both in South Carolina. They both have great programs for whatever major you want. And you decide to take the one less popular, and you make your own decision, right? Then that's made all the difference positively for you. But that's not really what the poem is about. Really, the poem is about making a difficult choice and how sometimes we might feel regret or wish we could choose both, but we really can't. So it's really more of a poem about the reality of making difficult choices and not following the beat of your own drum. So, with that being said, we are going to answer some questions. I've already written the answers down, 1, 4, and 5. or 1, 4, and 7 to get you started, and then you're going to answer 2, 3, 5, and 6, and I will call on you in our Zoom meeting to go over these questions. Okay, so let's analyze. Let's break this poem down. Number 1, what dilemma is the speaker faced with at the beginning of the poem? Well, a dilemma is the conflict, the hardship. What is the dilemma? Well, the speaker is faced with indecision when he must choose between two paths. You might have a text-to-self connection, right? When you've been given two similar options, you don't really know which choice to make. And sometimes you just have to make one quickly. I will give you some time if you want to pause and copy that down. Number 4. What does the phrase, "then took the other just as fair," mean? You might have been confused when it said fair. This phrase means both paths were equally desirable, right? Fair means just as good, right? So one wasn't more attractive than the other. Go ahead and copy that down if you need to. Pause. And finally, number 7. How can this poem represent choices that we have to make in life? Okay, this is where it gets into the metaphorical part, right? That the poem really isn't about two paths in a forest. That would be kind of boring. Who wants to write about that? Well, actually, there are poets that write a lot about nature, like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Thoreau, but we're not going to get into those guys right now. But here's what I wrote. Sometimes in life we are faced with the challenge of indecision, and our choices may bring us regret, fear, or uncertainty. In this case, the speaker does have maybe a sense of regret because he says he wished he could travel both roads, take both paths in life, but he cannot, and that has caused him some grief. So I'll put that up if you need to pause and copy down the answer. Okay, so we have learned our two terms and we've analyzed our poem. Halfway, your assignment is to answer the rest of the questions left blank. And I'm going to have an exit slip for you all. Exit slip. The question is, if you could write a one-line refrain to add to a road not taken, what would it be? So pretend you're Robert Frost and you are time traveling back in time. And you go, something's missing in this poem. I know, a refrain. What would it be? Remember what a refrain is? A one line, well, it doesn't have to be one line, but in this case it will be. A one-line repetition that shows up throughout the poem. It can show up 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, however many times you want. I suggest 4, and I also suggest it be at the end of each stanza. Let's count how many stanzas we had, a group of poetic lines. We had 4, right? So you're going to add a line to each stanza at the end. Remember, it does not have to rhyme with each one, but if you wanted it to rhyme with the first stanza, you could. All right, here's the question again. So that will tell me if you understand what a refrain is and if you can create your own. The highest level of thinking is being able to create new material, learning something and applying it to make it your own, which is so very cool. All right, and finally, if you are interested in Robert Frost, I sent a biography to your parents. I sent really this whole packet of Robert Frost to them, and it tells you more about his life. The coolest part about his biography, in my opinion, is that he actually recited one of his poems, it's at the end of this paragraph, at President John F. Kennedy's inauguration. The inauguration is the ceremony where one officially becomes president, where they do the oath. So when I say Robert Frost is a popular American poet, I'm talking presidential popular, okay? And so he's very well beloved, but this biography tells you who he married, where he lived, what inspired his writing, how he got started. etc. So if you would like to read this as an extension, you can, and maybe I'll have some trivia questions on our Zoom meeting about his life. So make sure you have this next to you. At our next Zoom meeting, we will discuss Robert Frost as a poet. We will discuss the answers to your questions as we comprehend and analyze The Road Not Taken. And we will also discuss your exit slip answers and see how many cool refrains we can come up. Remember, the refrain can't be random. It has to fit with the poem. If you want it to be metaphorical, you can. Absolutely. All right. All right, Robert Frost and I are heading out. We hope you guys have a great day. Goodbye.